Hello, my name is Zach Nesbitt,
I'm Dan King.
and today we're going to talk with you about possibilities for the future of higher education.
And we're looking at this from the point of view of the Party for People with Special Needs, as a political organization to give a voice to those who don't have a voice and to create a society that works for everyone.
So I am a writer, an historian, and a public speaker, and I hold the equivalent of a doctorate in my field, which is early 18th century Caribbean history and maritime culture. And now, how did I get that? How did I get there? Well, I am self-educated, and today we're going to share with you a little bit about how I've done that.
So let me just jump in here, Zach. I came to you because I was very concerned about the state of education in the 21st century. There's a bunch of things that I'm very concerned about. Certainly the kind of deal that my generation is giving to millennials. Education is so expensive now, and students are graduating with enormous amounts of debt. And when I went to university, I graduated with $2,500 of student debt, which is a big difference.
Shocking. Yeah.
And so I'm concerned about what kind of deal young millennials are getting. And I'm in an area, I'm living in the area of the University of Toronto. I know lots of University of Toronto students, and I just shudder at the debt load that they're facing. The other question is, I'm very familiar with the University of Toronto. I like the academic environment here, but the question is, how good is the education that they're getting? Now, University of Toronto is a very good university, but there's still lots of questions about how much depth people are getting. So Zach has accomplished something that I'd like to hear more about in terms of self-education. So Zach, just tell me a bit. You mentioned before you have like the equivalent of a PhD in maritime history of the Caribbean. And why don't you tell us a little bit about, what brought you to this? First of all, why you did it, and second of all, how you did it.
From a very early age, I had an understanding of what I was passionate about and what I wanted to pursue studies. So with the sort of free open-mindedness of a youth, I thought, well, what's stopping me? So I decided to self-pursue it, areas that I had interest in. So where that first came in with me was studying the history of the early 18th century Caribbean, namely the golden age of pirates. And the more and more I looked into it, the more I found that history was more fascinating than any fiction that I had read. So getting into it, where were my first forays, and where did I really find my research? First places to start were online forums, because what I discovered gradually was that there are communities, international communities of people who were interested in researching the same subject that I was. And there were people who knew a heck of a lot more than I did. Rightly so, because they had spent a good part of their lives involved in the research and study of this. So I went to these online forums, and they were relatively easy to find, and either through private forums or through things like Facebook groups, and gradually got involved with the discussion, started reading up on things that I was intrigued about and unfamiliar with, and familiarizing myself with them. And then when I got to the point where I understood enough to be asking questions, I began asking questions that I couldn't find answers to by doing a search in their search engine. And this proved very useful in a multitude of ways, because it not only pointed me to members of community who had vast experience in their field and could give me positive answers to the questions I was looking for, but also they gave me access to resources, their resource banks, that I could pursue my own personal study in, and so that's what I did.
What form are these resources in?
So, very good question. So
I'm wondering, I'm waiting to hear this. Yeah.
So a lot of them came from physical publications, manuscripts, which would now be in online formats, even e-books, of amateur historians or even professional historians who had compiled data together in the format of books, in easily digestible for sort of the modern reader, less so academic papers, and I later got into more the strong academia side of things. So that was a great place to start because these books had citations, and the citations were usually taken from first-hand period documents written in the 1700s about the subjects that I was researching. And that's also the second resource that the people in the online forums would point me to, would be the first-hand period resources and the documents. Now, the brilliant thing about the internet age, which has never come before, I've told people this time and again that I could not have done this 20 years ago.
Right.
The brilliant thing about the internet age is that so much is digitized. So many pamphlets, papers, journals, diaries, travel logs, accounts written by the individuals from the 1700s who either were the pirates themselves or interacted with the pirates, or part of their world, the topic that I was researching, say, boats, recorded these things. And now, they've been written down and published in London in, say, 1712. But somebody from New Hampshire or England had taken these books and digitalized them. So now through a simple Google search, I could usually find the majority of them online for free with a little bit of digging. Right. So it took a number of years to get the process down, but the main knowledge is knowing where to look and how to look for what you're looking for. And for that, you go to the people who have already done it, and you educate yourself. And once I knew where to look and once I knew how to look, every single shred of information I could have wanted was literally at my fingertips. I would know which keywords to type in at which resource bank, and it would turn up gold again and again. Yeah.
Wow. It's amazing to think that you were able to access, as I say, things that people wrote at the time.
Mm-hmm.
That amazes me because people must have been writing a lot about pirates because I think people were always very concerned about them. And
Yes.
sea voyages, it was the golden age of exploration
Indeed,
in the 18th
and sail.
century. And so sea voyages were a necessity at that time. The
Absolutely.
New World was being settled. And so people would write letters, I hope we don't run into pirates. I heard last week there were pirates in this area, blah, 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 you know, and people talk about what size ships they had and what kind of sails they had and how fast they were.
Yep.
Those are all questions people must have had.
Absolutely.
And people would plan, I think people would plan the trips, we'd plan our trips according to the weather. People must have planned the trips according to pirates, I suppose.
It's very true, yeah.
Yeah.
One thing that I got very clear on from studying the period itself and studying the pirates from the point of view of the people in their own era and how they viewed them, it vastly changed all of my preconceptions about who I thought and what I thought pirates were. And it turns out that they were considered more as folk heroes of the common people, people who had stepped outside of the caste system and were carving out lives for themselves of freedom with the really first sort of democratic system outside of ancient Greece and Rome that was not based on landowning or race. Anyone on a pirate ship was equal. They got an equal share of the treasure. And
Even the captain?
even the captain. The captain was sometimes granted 2 shares as a gift from the crew, but
Yeah.
if you were a cabin boy and it was your first voyage, you ate the same food, you slept in the same quarters. There was a huge equality on the ship that was unknown in the 18th century. So this was eye-opening for me to see and study from the point of view, the vantage point of the people in that era. And like I said earlier, in times past, even the last 20 years, it would have been much more difficult to get this kind of information firsthand, whereas nowadays, it's all out there, digitized, which is absolutely brilliant.
So pirate ships were in a sense a form of cooperative, really.
Yes, yes indeed.
That's
yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm amazed that the captain only got 2 shares. I've heard other stories about but I don't want to say anything about pirates because I'm not an expert on that subject. I'd like to listen to what you have to say
I would
about
love to
them.
educate
Yeah.
sometime.
All right. So what would you? This is how you did your research. You found these resources. You accessed, as I say, original records from the time, and then. So would you find out what were the final results? Obviously, you talked about folk heroes. Was there music? Was there ever music? Because often in music captures what was going on. Any music that glorified pirates?
Absolutely. There are many tales from the era that there's this romanticized vision of, running off to a tropical island with all this plundered treasure and living away, the life of a king. And it was really an era when nobody was doing that. If you were born a common shoemaker's son, you would live, or daughter, you would live your entire life in sort of that system, and nobody really stepped out of that. Whereas these pirates were stepping outside of the hierarchical structure of society, carving out their own rudimentary democracies at sea, and when it had all gone well, they wouldn't go away and bury their treasure. They would go and live their days in glory of, music, wine, and just enjoying the tropical life, really.
So you're saying to me there isn't really that much in terms of buried treasure?
There is there's only one recorded case in history in the golden age of piracy when a pirate buried his treasure,
Yeah.
and that was when Captain William Kidd, who was in fact a privateer, which is a whole other...
Which is different. He's not a
totally
pirate.
different.
He's
Not a pirate. He's a
yeah.
licensed government privateer, but he
Yeah.
had got set up and framed.
Yeah.
He had to make his treasure disappear so that the government officials that had actually framed him, who were coming after him, so that there wouldn't be any evidence. So he
Right.
buried all of his treasure, but then went back in a number of weeks and dug it back up. Because what's the point of going and risking life and limb, plundering and marauding, and potentially risking your neck,
Yeah.
to only go and bury it away somewhere? There's no point in that, right?
That's not the famous Oak Island story in Nova Scotia, is it?
No, it's not. No, it's
That's
not.
a different
That's a
one.
much later.
But
yeah.
Oak Island, isn't that a pirate treasure?
No, actually, it's not.
Really, it's not. Well, you'll have to tell us that.
I'd be
That's-
glad to.
It's,
Yeah.
it's a different context.
There's a huge amount of lore around different areas that have garnered fame because of their association with pirates, but that only came later with fictional tracks like Treasure Island. Treasure Island itself has things that are anomalies and are meant to be anomalies if you read the book, but they became mainstays of we associate with pirates because Treasure Island became so popular, namely burying treasure. Flint's crew buried treasure as a last resort. It wasn't said to be a common pirate practice. Even Billy Bones himself, one of the characters in the books, has a cache of pieces of 8 and doubloons on him, and because it became so vastly popular, it became a part of the public consciousness that pirates equals buried treasure. Just as Captain Hook, making Peter Pan walk the plank, brought in the idea that pirates equals walking the plank, which was never done. Not one recorded instance during the golden age of piracy of a single pirate making a prisoner or otherwise walk the plank.
Really?
Yeah.
Intriguing.
Yeah.
So you're telling me pirates have got a bad rap?
They certainly do. They certainly do. And fascinatingly so, because history is written by the victors, always, right?
Yeah.
Who is, in this case, who was our concept of pirates is directly informed from the fiction we know about them, but also the, indeed, the propaganda continued against them by the people who wrote the history books way back then. And who were the pirates attacking?
Right, of course.
It was the landowners, the merchant aristocracy,
Right.
the governmental forces, who none of which were happy with the pirates being these sort of common people stepping outside of the law and taking their share of riches and fortunes, which could never be theirs otherwise, and even inspiring the common people, which was the government and aristocracy's workforce. The pirates were inspiring these people by example to go and join them and live this life of freedom and luxury. So the powers that be naturally started to paint pirates in a very sinister and downright evil face.
Yeah, it was propaganda.
Exactly.
basically, Yeah.
And here is a fact that Blackbeard, the most famous terrorizing, fearsome pirate that we have in popular consciousness, Blackbeard never harmed or never killed a single prisoner in cold blood.
Really.
Yeah.
That's really different from
Shocking,
what
yeah.
we normally think.
So the government would either fully make up lies or grossly exaggerate stories about the pirates and make the uncommon common. Now, pirate wasn't a type of person. It's not, oh, you are a pirate, all of a sudden you're this, this, and that. It was a vocation, just like sailor, just like blacksmith. So any kind of person could become a pirate. Now, there were the rare exceptions for, bloodthirstiness, but they were the exceptions and by no means the norm, and by no means a staple of the pirate culture or society. And in fact, if you look at what the nations the governments and their militaries did to one another on a regular basis and did to their own citizens.
Right, yeah.
It was much more gruesome, much more graphic, including, capital punishments and such, than anything that a pirate ever perpetrated against an individual, whether it be prisoner or government official.
Wow. Well, now, so what we have here is an amazing discovery, new knowledge, which has emerged onto the world. And I think the real question is, we want to get focused back
Yeah.
on how this knowledge was done and the educational process that you've done.
Certainly.
But actually, I'd be amazed to see the links in the future between how pirate culture was affected, say, by the American Revolution. There must have been because that happened in the 18th century as well.
It happened a little while later, and it would have been sort of the kids or the grandkids of this generation of pirates. But the sentiments were very well fueled there.
I could see that. So what you're saying is the pirate culture may have predated the American Revolution.
It was a predecessor
and contributed
for
to it.
Yes.
And at least at least culturally, perhaps.
It was already very embedded in the colonies and the mindset of the people in that era. They were just waiting for a touchstone to the fire.
Amazing. Well, there's new knowledge out there the world needs to get, and you used online resources plus references to historical documents that were written by people who were there at the time, and you acquired this knowledge, which really nobody really knows about. So I'm looking forward to your book.
Thank you.
Except that we may not be writing books anymore.
That's a good point.
That's right. Maybe it'll be a video game instead. Okay.
I'm open to possibilities.
But this is all, and this is what we're talking about, is the new culture, the new media, and how it's affecting education entirely. So, so we've got a couple of ideas, a couple of resources that were used, a lot of online stuff, and you accessed the kind of stuff that academics would access if they're writing a new history.
And I would like to add to that, I also did direct research through the archives of Greenwich at Kew in London. Their digitized archives and their correspondents there were able to scan microfilms that I had requested specifically of ship's logs, of captain or commander's letters back to the Admiralty and the Home Authorities, or the digitalized archives of the Calendar of State Papers American Colonial Series, which is the daily correspondence between the government officials and in the Caribbean and the colonies, and the Board of Trade, as well as the King and the government officials and the home authorities back in England. Also, my resources were the National Overseas Archives at Aix-en-Provence in France.
Right.
Again, amazing correspondents there who would help for the records that were not digitalized. They would go in person and take pictures and scan them and send them back to me, and they would do their best translation, and then I could also piece together what I knew of 18th century French and the phonetics and how it was spoken and then how it was written, because this was, again, before dictionaries really had come into big use, so spelling was a wide variety. And also the digitized archives of Seville in Spain, so that I got all the perspectives, not just the English perspective on history, but each one of the major participants, as well as Holland, of the era, and all of their views on different historical events that shaped the era, such as battles or large trade scandals or geopolitics, all of these things that they were dealing with at the time. So that was a large resource as well.
A life before spell check.
Right.
That must have been like. All right. Well, let's take a look at what we've got now. So I'm waiting for the movie script here. This is going to be a great one. Can you imagine a whole new genre of movies coming out, which have totally different thematics and personalities developed? I think that would be that'd be fascinating.
And like I said, the fiction or the fact that I discovered. Truth is stranger than fiction. It's a true adage, and I was amazed at how much more unbelievable, mind-blowing, and compelling, audacious, and riveting that history actually was compared to any kind of fiction that I myself or anyone could really cook up. Because you read this and you say, how can this be real? Like if you read this as a fiction, you'd be like, next.
Yeah.
Because it's just so far-fetched, but this is actually their lives. This is what they did.
Well, what you're saying is there's documentation to support that this is what happened.
This is actually what happened.
This is
Precisely,
what happened.
Precisely.
This is people 200-300 years ago wrote documents, and this was for them. This was true in
Yeah.
their time,
Yeah.
in their context.
And it's
Wow.
far more brilliant and awe-inspiring than any fiction
Right.
about them.
Okay, so this is a really great example. Obviously, I can see a great career for you as a scriptwriter. I can
Thank you.
just see it happening, and that's your next step, is to find the resources to make the connections you need to do that. But what we're looking for here is the amazing new resources that you
Yes.
found available that made this possible. And so, what I'd like to do is just take a look at what is available. Let's just imagine we're doing something in physics or in biology and genetics. These are all like hot expanding areas, and let's just look at what other resources, or in systems and computers, in blockchain, in artificial intelligence. I mean, there's so many other areas
Indeed.
which again have readily accessible new materials available. So let's just take a look at that. And the first thing I'd like to talk about now is how new resources that go beyond what you've done. And actually, this is just something else for you to crack in your next stage. But what I'm going to talk about is what the Toronto Public Library system has done. And some Einstein at the Toronto Public Library decided that we should make technical and learning facilities available to everybody who lives in Toronto. And that means everybody who has a library card. And if you have a library card, there's a whole host of resources that are available to you for online learning. And it's this process called, this system called lynda.com. That's Lynda spelled with a Y.
LYNDA.
That .com, that's right. Now, first point is, I want to encourage people not to go to the lynda.com site. Okay? Don't bother. Because if you get online, the first thing they will do is offer you a 30-day free trial period, and then you get hooked, and then you get cut off.
They have to pay.
And the problem with that is they want you to pay. And I'm okay with paying, but lynda.com is already getting paid by Toronto Public Library. Because if you go through this Toronto Public Library portal to lynda.com and log in with your library card and the last 4 digits of your phone number, boom, you've got access to thousands of courses.
Wow.
On just about everything you can talk about. Certainly technical, artistic. Now, the thing I like about it is it's heavily weighted towards lots of technical issues, computer, how to do HTML, how to do Java, how to do a range of programming languages. I don't think they've got Linux in there. I'm a big Linux head, so they got lots of that. So that's a vast range. And then I think in the music field, we looked up something with
audio design.
About audio design, which is something I know nothing about, but it was all there,
Yeah.
right? We looked it up. We just looked it up by name. There it was, yeah. And so, so certainly in the artistic and in the technical areas, it's certainly very well covered. Certainly, I'd love to see more in physics, and there's lots of areas. Physics, the Perimeter Institute has lots of lectures online that you could see, and these
What's
are
that called?
the Perimeter.
Perimeter Institute.
Just Google it.
Okay.
The Perimeter Institute, and that's the center in Waterloo. Stephen Hawking was a visiting professor there for a while, shortly before he passed away. And you want to learn about dark energy, that's the place to go.
Wow, that's exciting.
And good news for everybody. Nobody knows very much at all about dark energy. That's pretty. All we know about dark energy is the name, but it's 75% of the universe.
That's right.
70. So I think we would like to know something about 75% of the universe. And this little bit here, and this little bit here, and this chair we're sitting on, that's only 5% of the universe.
Right.
Baryons, they're called. We're made out of baryons, 5% of the universe. So we really don't know very much about what's around us. But so anyway, these resources are around. Lynda.com, the Perimeter Institute. There's tons of online libraries and that are providing really comprehensive stuff so you can move forward. And I predict that Toronto is going to, more than it is now, going to really become a great tech and learning center simply because some person at the library decided It was important. We have access to this stuff.
Well done.
That's what I thought. An applause for them, for sure. So that's one of the resources that are available, and we can expand it to look at what the universities are providing. And you mentioned a bit to me about how the universities like MIT and several other universities made their curriculum publicly available. Have you seen any of that?
I have, yeah. Actually,
tell us about that.
a lot of the digitized documents that I came across, or that I was looking for, in fact, were part of university collections, and through some very helpful members of the community, again, which I did not have access to because I was not a student of said university, but members of the community in my field were, and they made them available, the resources available to all of us, so that everyone could benefit from it. So that was hugely advantageous and beneficial to the whole group and the whole research movement going forward.
That's right. Now here you are talking to people who you don't really know very well, and they decided that you certainly were worth their time, that they would make resources available to you. All right, and which brings us to the next step, is how people work together. And there's a whole lot of new tools out there that are enabling people who don't know each other to work together. The number one, certainly the largest in the world, is Wikipedia. You know, and thousands, hundreds of thousands of volunteers have worked to put together literally millions of articles and on Wikipedia, and that's an example of what's called a wiki. Okay, so we have a wiki, which is collaborative software that allows people to collaborate on preparation of documents. Now, a couple of points, and I'm sure everyone has had the experience of working with somebody who they'd rather not collaborate with. This has happened. Wikipedia is already on top of this, because every time you set up a team, there's always somebody who really shouldn't be on the team. And that happens when you're preparing Wikipedia documents as well. So people go, they get on the Wikipedia, and somebody does years of research, and they put together all sorts of valuable information. And somebody else comes along and says, no, well, I read an alternative thing on Breitbart News or something, and I should change this to this and this and this. And some people go in and say, no, I'm sorry, you're wrong, you're outvoted. And what happens is Wikipedia keeps all the versions. They keep a history of all of the versions that have been happening. And if somebody goes through and is not qualified to make a positive contribution to a document, you can just skip their contribution and just go back to an earlier version. We call it revert to a previous version. So I think that's a good thing about this document. It allows people who don't trust each other to work together, and then when things happen that shouldn't happen, then we can easily undo the damage.
That is definitely useful.
Yeah, well, exactly. So you've never had an opportunity to work on a team with Wikipedia?
No, I never have. Surprisingly so.
God.
But again, it's the world of we don't know what we don't know.
Well, exactly, and this is the point. Zach's done some amazing things. I've done some things that I'm really happy I've done, and the world is waiting for this. We cannot be thinking in 20th century terms. The world is waiting for new advances, new ways of working together, and new discoveries like you've come up with to create a new world of knowledge. And the example really is, if you look at Wikipedia, you can see there's been a total explosion in the world's knowledge. And the fact is, we've got to go more steps. More steps are available to us. We've got to have new ways, the similar gains in how we work together, and equally large gains in our productivity.
Indeed.
So that'll be quite the area. So we've got new resources that are available, and a ton of them are emerging. We've got new ways of working together to create this, more efficient teams. And then, in addition to things like Wikipedia, we've got, and other similarly based resources, we've got teams working together. Now, for example, I have a course I teach called Advanced Programming for Beginners. And it's funny, you think, how on earth can you teach?
How does that work?
Yeah, exactly. How on earth can you teach advanced programming to people who are really just learning
Yeah.
programming? And the short answer is that's the best time to catch them. Before people are hooked on 20th century technologies, old technologies, and old ways of doing things where you really have to spend most of your time unlearning what you've already learned in order to actually expand to new visions.
How interesting.
Exactly. Well, it's needed. So here's what happened: is what I have the most advanced tools, computing tools available, and just to name them for the record, these are tools developed by a former Harvard mathematician called Ken Iverson, and he won a Turing Prize for his award, and basically his view is that computer languages should look like mathematics, except that mathematics is flawed. And so he set out to reinvent mathematics, which he did quite successfully.
Wow. That's quite the undertaking.
And he says this form of mathematics notation, specifically it's a notation, is better than the form of mathematics notation we're familiar with in high school. And as soon as I saw it, I just loved it right from the start. It's very symbolic, like mathematics, very compressed, very compact, and sometimes, like mathematics, you are left scratching your head. But it's very, very powerful. It's exceedingly powerful. And so what I'm doing is taking people with bright minds who are dedicated to solving complex problems, and we use the most powerful tools available, which is a set of mathematical programming languages starting with APL, J, and K. And K has risen to prominence in recent years. 17 of the top 20 financial firms in the world are using
Wow, so it's that well recognized
it. Like
and
literally
embraced.
billions of dollars are traded every day in high-frequency trading programs, like all this machine programming. I wouldn't say all of it is done in K, but a lot of it. And I would say the successful ones.
So it's a very valid field.
Well, it's it's true high finance,
Highly used.
high finance of the highest order. So the point is that I can take extremely powerful tools that sort of look like mathematics, teach them to bright young minds who are dedicated to solving complex problems. And why? Because the world's full of complex problems, and we should be using powerful tools to solve them. So that's what I'm doing now. The way I teach this course is I go online. And we go on to Google Hangouts. Sometimes we use Skype, but we all share our screens. And I find it's actually better than being in a classroom with people, because in the classroom, the first thing you have to do is create a display so people can see what you're doing. And the display is up there on the board, and there's not a record of it, and there's all sorts of things. Whereas if I just share my screen, everybody's within earshot. Everybody can see my screen at once. We can take turns sharing each other's screens, and so. One part, I think the most effective way to teach is to get others to teach. So I have some of my advanced students, I get them teaching my junior students. So they're really, and I'm there ready to jump in case they make a slip.
Right. Because then they get to show also how much their knowledge has expanded.
They get to show their knowledge.
And they learn by teaching.
They totally learn by teaching, because when you're delivering something to somebody, you got to put it all together with no loose ends.
Yes.
So the pressure's on. You know?
Yeah.
It's just like standing up in your grade 3 class and reciting a poem.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
if you forget a line or if you skip a line, everybody wants to do well, and this is a great opportunity for people to do it. So
Certainly.
the point is, online, on-screen sharing tools are creating a new environment that people can use. And this is something you could be doing in your work. Maybe you've already done it, I don't know. But creating an online environment where you are working with all of these other people who, certainly at one point, knew more than you do. Mm-hmm. And now maybe you can be sharing this knowledge with others. And I can just imagine what the pictures, not necessarily videos, but the pictures are like, some of the stuff you might have to display. That'd be very
fantastic.
interesting. Yeah.
Thank you.
So those are things that are available with Google Hangout. But it gets better. There's more. So I'm teaching computer languages, and naturally there's lots of details to computer languages.
So, yeah.
And so like the languages that I'm talking about, the deeply mathematical languages, they have like 300 primitives. So there's 300 things that you need to learn how they work I don't want to say before you use language. You can probably use language effectively with half of them. But you want to know most of them because they all do amazing things.
Right.
So the trouble is keeping them all in your head and
Mm.
having them available, thinking of them when you need them. And so one of the things one of my students turned me on to was this thing called spaced repetition. And I wrote him back an email saying, what the hell is that? And he says, well, it's a protocol they've developed so that people can learn. It's all scientifically designed. People have things repeated over and over to them at a certain time. And every 5 days you recycle and remind you of this fact and this fact and this fact. And so I went out and took the summary of the 300 primitives that I discussed, and I distilled it down into 792 facts, which were all question and answer, all nicely spaced, and put them on this little program called Anki, A-N-K-I, which you can sit there with your cell phone. We should add this perhaps to the video later. You can sit there with the cell phone, and you can just, while you're waiting for a bus or waiting for the subway, it just keeps popping you questions. And you can hear it auditory as well. And if you know the answer, you say great. And if you don't know the answer, you can say try me again a little later. So this is a great, I mean, I'm actually inspired for the first time in my life. I can imagine I might be able to learn Chinese.
Wow.
I mean, I could take on, right now I'm studying French,
Right.
because I've determined to learn to speak French well. And
Right.
every day I got 10,000 sentences in my little Android. 10,000 sentences, and it keeps popping new words up to me all the time.
It's genius. I'd like to briefly segue into this with language learning. So this is something, absolutely, that if somebody's studying languages, right, the old method of language learning in the classroom is out the window. We have had things for the past 10, 15, 20 years that have just revolutionized our ability to learn and comprehend foreign languages. I mean, short of actual immersion and going to the country and living and learning.
That's good too.
That's fantastic. But if you don't have that access, what else can you do? Well, there are these phenomenal things that have just taken the world by storm. One of the early, ones on the scene that has just had a brilliant and extraordinary proven track record, to their merit, is Rosetta Stone.
Yeah.
The associative learning of learning not through translation but by association. So here's a picture of, say 10 eggs, and it'll give you Dizuf,
yeah.
and it'll show you the picture, but it won't tell you what it is in English. It's your brain that's making the association, just like you learned that as a child, this is a chair, right? Or this is a wall. It's by experiential. So there are these brilliant things, and there are many, many ones that have even expanded on the subject or taken their own route. Duolingo is one of them, specifically for Mandarin, which I'm familiar with as I'm learning myself. Hello Chinese. And there are a host of other ones. So apps. Apps is another fantastic thing to research and check out if it's applicable to the area you're studying.
How do you
For
spell
instance,
apps? What's
language.
this?
Apps, like applications, like things you get for your phone.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Okay.
The apps
Right.
that you download at the App Store or
Right. Oh,
on
yeah.
your
Well,
Android.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this is right. That's what Anki is. Anki is just something you download for free.
Yeah.
And then I'm building decks. It's like flashcards. It's just like flashcards, but I'm building decks for Anki.
So those are ones you can use and other people can use?
Well, I'm giving them to my students. I'm building a deck, and then I'm distributing them to my students.
So now they're learning that, what did you call it, the callback?
Anki, you mean?
Yeah. They're learning the same format that you're...
They're learning J and K, the languages I'm teaching.
But your student taught you the specific, what would you
Well,
call
he
it?
just told me about it.
Yeah.
All he did was tell me, but I went off and I researched it, and I thought, wow.
So
hey.
now they're getting to benefit from this thing that was contributed by a student. Now you're using it too.
Yeah.
And you're using it to educate yourself, and now in turn, after putting some work into it, you can use it to educate your students.
I totally, yeah.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
It blew me away because what I did is I just went in online, again using online tools, and I said, well, these must be data files of some type. So I dug up the formats, and I'm going, I can do that formats. And I basically wrote a little program that collected all the questions and collected all the answers and matched them all together, and there was some spacing that's required to properly do it, and then you just upload it.
Genius.
All set.
Genius.
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing is, you see, people have been studying how learning happens. And that's why we're talking here today, is because learning doesn't happen the way we used to do it. You know, that was just what got in the way of learning. now there's new paradigms for learning, which are really scientifically discovered and scientifically tested. And this spaced repetition is something that's going to make learning easier. I mean, for me to think that I could learn Chinese, I mean, it's not impossible. It still will be an enormous thing. Just finishing French is bad enough. But it's not impossible for me to learn Chinese now.
Yeah.
And that's just blows me away.
Yeah.
The fact that I could actually say I might be able to do that someday.
From the comfort of your own home.
Yeah, and I definitely intend to finish off my French so I can hang around Montreal cafes and not insult people by speaking English to them. You know, so that would be good. Yeah, that's a good reason.
Yeah.
You want to get a few smiles. If you're new in town, you want to get a few
you
smiles.
Want to ingratiate yourself with a
You want
local.
smiles, not frowns.
Yeah.
All right, so that's the Yankee. So back to education as it was, and this is the looking back part of this, and this is what brought me together with you. The reason I contacted you through your father actually was because I was looking at university education, and I was very concerned about the debt, how cumbersome it is, and how expensive it is. And I was concerned about education. And then I immediately thought of you, because I knew you were self-educated. And I'm thinking of things that we've just talked about, a variety of educational alternatives, online resources, wikis, communities, and spaced repetition. We thought of all those things.
Open source.
All of open source, all of which are pretty revolutionary as far as education is concerned. And I'm thinking back at what, in my time, used to go to the university bookstore and buy a big fat textbook for like about $80, you know? And we would live out of that textbook for the next 8 months. And I'm thinking of A, so much money, and B, so cumbersome as a medium. I mean, the textbook should be broken up into different parts: online videos, spaced repetition, wikis so I can collaborate with my teammates.
So much more engaging.
That's right, absolutely. So that's what we needed, and definitely too expensive. So the student debt of this century is, in my opinion, not justifiable. This was a conclusion I reached even before I picked up the phone and talked to you, is that the student debt is unconscionable, and that it's actually a social crime against millennials. Millennials are called the boomerang generation, which is not a very polite term, you know. People are, criticizing Pierre Trudeau or Justin Trudeau because he's moved back into the house of his father, you know. And the fact is, the economy, the world has changed, and I'm looking for a fair deal for millennials because, you know, we have to look after our new generation, and I don't think they're being looked after, especially with the cumbersome and expensive education program that we have. So I contacted you because you're self-educated, and I think in this conversation we've created a new idea that needs to be institutionalized. Dare I say it? It needs to be legitimized. The fact is, your self-educated program isn't legitimate in some ways, in that if you walked in, you know, with 60 other applicants for a job for which you were qualified, and you said, I'm self-educated, you know?
Right.
I mean, that would get you the door pretty fast. Most of the time, because the people who are doing the hiring actually don't know much about the field they're hiring in, you know? When I was hiring people for tech jobs, you know, the first question I would ask is I wouldn't even look at their resume. I would say, what are your hobbies?
You're one of the few.
Well, yeah, so I hear.
But smart.
Oh,
absolutely
give
smart.
me a break, you know. I mean, I'm interested in people who, since I was hiring for computer talent, I'm interested in people who write games or, you know, do stuff, you know, do stuff,
Related
creative stuff,
yeah.
creative things, not business oriented, but creative things with the technology that I want them to work in, you know, and
it shows a self-fueled interest.
well, and if anybody told me they chose computer science because it was a good career, they got out the door fast. Those are the people who write the worst code, because when you do that, when you think of your job that way, the code, the work, which I think is a work of art, gets in the way. It's in the way of you getting what you want, getting
Right.
ahead,
Right.
and etc.
And the same could be said of variable any career.
Well, that's right. Right. We want people who are inspired by the work that they're doing, and that's
Absolutely.
where self-education
Yes.
comes into play. So we need to find a way so that
Legitimize it.
people who have control over the economy can actually not be taking a risk by hiring somebody who's self-educated. I knew I was not taking a risk, but a lot of other people, I invite them to take a look. People who are not millennials, I invite them to take a look at that. So we need to look at the next step and what can be done from here. What your generation can do and what my generation can do to recreate education. So I'm just going to put forward a few ideas about things we really have to have. The first thing is that education must be valuable. And if it's not valuable, that means that people will, like MBAs, for example. People go out, everybody's getting their MBAs, and eventually MBAs don't become respected anymore. I've talked to people who say, don't tell people you got an MBA, it won't do you any good anymore. And that's
Which is too bad, because all that work.
Well, that's right. Well, I had so much fun getting my MBA. I had a lot, it's been a lot, and I always made sure I always was excited about the course that I took. And anybody who took their MBA, because it's a good career path, I just feel sorry for them, and for the people, and for the companies they work for. I think you need to be inspired. Self-education is it. And for areas where competency must be tested in some objective way, I think we can invent new ways of testing competency that doesn't involve looking, that basically sets aside the competency tests you got in university if you went there, and just have a more generic way of testing competency.
So how could you see that?
Well, I mean, when I had to get into business school, I had to write a test, one of these GMAT tests, which is these aptitude tests, which also have their own problems. But quite frankly, I don't have the answer to that. I think that something should be done. I've thought about questions and answers and how people could be asking people questions. And the whole multiple choice type of question, which people want to do because they can be machine marked. Whereas if somebody writes a paragraph, somebody has to actually spend time reviewing it. But if you machine mark something, then you're really limited in what you can ask. So I've actually done a bit of work in trying to reinvent the multiple choice question, and I have a few ideas on what that might look like, but it's far from the full solution. I'm saying it's time for us to really take a look at self-education and how people are self-educated and who is self-educated, and start taking these tools and creating a whole new paradigm in education, and that's more accessible to people. And I give the last word to you.
Well, thank you. I think it's absolutely warranted, necessary, actually. It's high time. Not only considering the cons, the insane student debt and different things that are drawbacks to the current education system, but considering all of the opportunities that exist now that have never existed before for a new format and a new type of education that are just sitting right there, right in the palm of our hands.
Yeah, and the tools are free.
And the tools are free.
So many of them.
Yeah. And it just takes people seeing and getting together and putting their minds together as to how to use them fully. And that, I really think, is the secret to cracking the code.
Well, that's right. It's a big secret right now, and we got to tell the world.
Yeah.
So hopefully you'll watch this, and what I want is more feedback.
Yes,
from
please.
this. I want people to take the tools that we've mentioned and tell us the ones they've missed, and tell us how we can use the ones better that we've done.
Yeah, certainly.
And I want somebody out there to go on to lynda.com and tell me about the one amazing course that I still haven't found yet.
There you
Because
go.
I need people to be recommending things to
Yeah.
me,
Yeah.
That'd be great.
This is the future, this collaborative effort.
And we owe this to millennials, because
Yes.
millennials have to face a new century that, put it this way, my generation is not ready for this century. We need to prepare millennials for this century, and we need to use every tool available to
Absolutely,
us.
absolutely.
There you go.
And fundamentally, if we're training with tools from the past, we're not going to be prepared. So let's make the most of what we have at hand.
That's right.
Really make the most of it.
No, I mean, you'll be out of business if you're using tools from the 20th century. Textbooks and classrooms, in my personal view, are basically going to be out of business,
Wait.
like the typewriter.
Wait, send that to me on a fax, Dan. I need to get that on a fax.
Facts. That was definitely the last century.
Yeah. So it's just like that.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Zach. It's
Thank
been
you,
a pleasure.
Dan, and thank you all of us for
Thank
all of
you.
you for joining us today. We hope you learned something. And like Dan said, if you have any comments or ways that we can improve or areas that we've completely missed, let us know, because we are all about discovering new ways of furthering self-education and the future of education.
It's info@ppsn.on.ca. Send us an email.
Thanks
Thank
very
you.
much. And we'll put links up for the programs that we mentioned. Yes?
That'd be great.
Good.
Yeah, we should. That's just the beginning.
This is just the
We
beginning.
should, all right. All the best.